right, welcome to A Daily Dose of Jane, the Austen Antidote for 2020. And boy, we can all use that. The fourth live panel in our Pride and Prejudice and Zoom free virtual Jane Austen mini-fest presented by the Glendale Public Library. My name is Anna Caggiano, and I work here at the library. I'm a fan of Jane Austen and the organizer of this event. We have 5 live and 3 pre-recorded panels for you today, and recordings of these panels will also be available within 2 weeks of the event. All links and information are available at bit.ly/Jane Austen Zoom. Thank you everyone for being here. We encourage viewers to submit questions for panelists in the chat. This panel will be a discussion between husband and wife scholar professor team Devoney Lozer and George Justice, who met over a conversation about Austen that turned into an argument about Mansfield Park. Their nearly 25-year marriage has been fortified by a daily dose of Jane. The one and only Devoney Lozer is the author of The Making of Jane Austen, a Publisher's Weekly Best Summer book, and the editor of the Daily Jane Austen, A Year of Quotes. She is Foundation Professor of English at Arizona State University and author or editor of 7 other books of literature by women. Her recent writing has appeared in The Atlantic, The New York Times, Salon, The Washington Post, and Entertainment Weekly, and she's had the pleasure of talking about Austen on CNN twice. She was named a Guggenheim Fellow and an NEH Public Scholar in support of her next book project, a biography of the once celebrated, now forgotten sister novelists Jane and Anna Maria Porter. The book is scheduled for publication in fall 2021 by Bloomsbury. She has played roller derby under the name Stone Cold Jane Austen and is one of the coolest Janeites ever. George Justice is professor of English at Arizona State University. From 2013 to 2017, he served as Dean of Humanities and Associate Vice President for Arts and Humanities. A specialist in 18th century British literature, Professor Justice is the author and editor of scholarship on the literary marketplace, authorship, and women's writing. Prior to coming to ASU, he taught at the University of Pennsylvania, Marquette University, Louisiana State University, and the University of Missouri, where he also served as Vice Provost for Advanced Studies and Dean of the Graduate School. Justice is the editor of the W.W. Norton Critical Edition of Emma and the author of How to Be a Dean. Welcome, Devoney and George. It is so lovely to have both of you here. And I just take it away.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anna. I see there are a lot of friends already here in the audience. Great to see.
Oh, are we back?
Were we? We may have been muted. I was just saying. Thank you, Anna. It is great to be here. It's great to see so many friends in the audience and so many people that we haven't had the pleasure to meet yet. And thank you, Anna, for those introductions. Devoney, I have seen, and this is a conundrum that we're facing. I have seen in the chat already a number of requests for hearing about our initial argument about Mansfield Park. But I also know there are people here who have heard way too much about that. So maybe we should do a quick intro to that. Anna's intro covered some of the technical details. Why don't we talk for a moment only about our bizarre Janeite lives, and maybe that'll lead into some conversation about the quotidian Jane Austen, how Jane Austen works on a daily basis.
That sounds great. And I just want to say too, how I'm realizing how weird it is to see 2 people together on a Zoom screen. Like I'm not even used to that. And George and I haven't sat this close to each other in quite some time. So this is a great day in our relationship.
Social distancing. We're undistanced at the moment, but I feel okay about that.
Jane Austen brought us together, and she's keeping us close here, even in pandemic.
And if we give each other COVID, she'll have no.
So that sounds great, George. So you want to start just by talking about how we met over Austen. So maybe just step back from that. Our lives are so ridiculously Austen saturated that it should be a problem, but it actually feels like a gift.
And a complete gift. And it is from the moment we met, Devoney, and it carries through in our daily lives. And I think we'll end up, when we're talking about your book, The Daily Jane Austen, which I think is really a central focal point of our conversation today, we can talk about how those bits of Austen interweave themselves into our lives. But given the requests in the chat, let's do it quickly.
Can we first acknowledge that For those of you who were at the earlier panel with Deborah Yaffe, she came out to Missouri years ago and interviewed us. So we have had this story told by Deborah, very beautifully told.
Yes, and so I do tell some people, if you really want to read about it, you can read the chapter about how weird we are in Deborah's Among the Janeites book. So we can do it quickly.
Okay. So, George, are you telling it, or how are we telling it?
I'm going to start. You think we would know how to do this by now.
Yeah.
We met in 1994. And I was a finishing graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania.
And I was a early assistant professor at Indiana State University.
And so we were at the American Society for 18th Century Studies, which is the professional organization for scholars and teachers of that period's literature, which often includes Jane Austen.
And its acronym is ASEX. So that doesn't sound very propitious for a lot of things.
Well, yeah, nor does a lot of scholars getting together in the Doubletree Hotel in Tucson, Arizona sound like it's going to be an exciting moment, but it happened to be in our lives an exciting moment. We both had friends who were attending a small cocktail party sponsored by the University of Delaware Press, and just a recognition here of our great friend and mentor, Don Mell, who was the longtime editor-in-chief of the press and who recently, in the last year, has passed away. And we miss Don very much. And we've always attributed to Don and given him credit for having brought us together. I was feeling pretty good. I had just received my job offer for my first full-time faculty position at Marquette University in Milwaukee. So I was riding a little high, and I strode into this party, and I first met, wait, what's your issue?
I just thought it was ridiculous. Go ahead.
Yes,
but let's move this along.
We're moving along. And a friend of mine said, oh, you should meet my friend Devoney, who works on Jane Austen. And I felt like, sure, especially I looked at her and I thought, yeah, I'll talk to your friend Devoney who works on Jane Austen. She was very beautiful, wearing a black dress. And I must have said, hello, my name is George, but I don't even remember that part. I said, what's your favorite Austen novel? And I got right to the point.
Yeah, it was almost immediately. And I said, the one that I'm working on now is Northanger Abbey, because I was doing a dissertation chapter on Northanger Abbey.
And that's a stupid answer to a question, what's your favorite Jane Austen novel? So I said, I didn't ask you what you were working on. I asked you what your favorite was.
And so I said, if you're making me choose a favorite, my favorite is Pride and Prejudice.
And I said, well, my favorite is Mansfield Park, because I love Mansfield Park.
And I said Mansfield Park is my least favorite. And that is because I am too much like the heroine Fanny Price, who is boring.
And it was at that moment, as I was talking to her, that I decided I was going to marry Devoney. So we had a conversation about Pride and Prejudice and Mansfield Park. Of course, I defended Mansfield Park. I was going off to dinner. I asked her to come with. She said no, but we agreed to meet up at the Javelina Cantina. Still exists, or it did when we went down to Tucson a couple of years ago and had a celebratory drink there. So we met up at the Javelina Cantina after dinner. Okay. And we kept talking, and everybody else melted away. And I said to Devoney, I have an important question yes, I agree with Jean. I can't imagine Devoney being like Fanny Price either.
Who knows how Fanny Price grew up, right? We don't know.
Well, I do love Fanny Price too. But I asked Devoney, I said, I've got a very important question for you. And what did you say?
What was the question you asked?
The question I asked was, will you marry me? And
he asked me to marry him the day that we met. And I said, no, I will not marry you because I do not believe in the institution of marriage. So maybe that's sounding even less like Fanny Price. I don't know. But all I can say is he was very persuasive.
And that launched a long distance relationship. I mean, the little detail of I had to break up with my girlfriend when I got back to Philadelphia, but Devoney came out to visit me a month later.
And we got married in 1995, so about a year later.
You forgot the most important part. We had a secret engagement,
just
like Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax. She's had enough of talking about this.
We don't want to take the whole time doing this story.
Okay.
But the point is, and I know lots of you have Austen courtship stories. I just saw one in the Jane Austen Universe Facebook page this week. It was a couple where he had taken her just this week to Chawton House to the Jane Austen Museum, and she proposed to her. I don't know if it was at the house or at the museum. He'd proposed to her there and surprised her, and they had thousands of people responding. So I know that for many of us, Austen has had these weird parts of our daily lives for a long time. I happen to be lucky enough that it's also part of my courtship story, so that's a pretty cool thing. But it's basically been it's continued to be an Austen-infused life for both of us since then.
Absolutely, and the last time I used Austen, I was writing a sarcastic email message to a colleague, and I quoted Mr. Bennet about, what do you have to say to me about this? It seems like an hopeless business. And he wrote back quite rightly and said, well, if Mr. Bennet had not seen it as a hopeless business, maybe some of the terrible things that happened to Lydia might not have happened. But Jane Austen is part of our daily lives. How does that affect, I'm going to show the book, Jane Austen, A Year in Quotes, which just came out from University of Chicago Press, edited by Devoney. How did our lives or your life have an impact on how you thought about putting together snippets of Jane Austen into this book?
So one of the weird things about putting together a book like this, and I don't know if others of you I know work with Austen's words on a daily basis too, or you turn to Austen's words on a daily basis. But they told me you have to choose 378 quotes, and that meant one for each day of the year plus leap year, plus I got a longer one for the beginning of each month, so 378. And I thought, that'll be a fun task. Actually, it was really painful because coming up with just 378, right? What do I sound like? Like Miss Bates with the, limited as to 3. I was limited as to 378, and I found this really painful in some ways, which is obviously ridiculous and crazy. But I think the amazing thing about Austen is not only can we love her for her plots, for her characters, but just on the level of the sentence and even on the snippet, she just repays rereading and rereading. And that part of putting the book together was a blast.
So how did you choose those 378 quotations?
So I wish I could tell you that I reread everything, because that would also have been amazing. But they wanted it from me sooner than that. And from the teaching that you and I have done together over the years and separately over the years, we have enough of a familiarity, I think, with the lines that we go back to in the classroom. So some of them that I went back to were the ones that we've used in the classroom that students had responded to. I knew that I needed to choose things that people would expect to see there, right? You can't have a quote book without "it is a truth universally acknowledged." That's the very first line of the introduction, as well as one of the first of the snippets. So those things, but also I wanted from a range of texts. I wanted from the letters, and the more I thought about it, I really wanted people to get what was around the lines that we know. So when you see that line from the 10-pound note, right? Caroline Bingley on the 10-pound note, I declare there's no enjoyment like reading, right? I wanted to give the reader what comes before and after that. So that, those of us who know Austen well know that line is taken in a context where all of the irony of it is lost when it's put on the 10-pound note. But to see it in the full context where she yawns before it and yawns afterward, that's what I wanted in the book. And the other thing I'm really thrilled that University of Chicago Press let me do is to indicate who's saying the quotation, because that is also something I think is really missing from other Austen quotation books. There are plenty of them out there, obviously, but most of them do not give you a sense of who said it. They just attribute it to Jane Austen. And I wanted people to know, because so much of how we judge a line from her depends on who's saying it.
So how much context do you need for a quotation? Some people have made the claim that Austen's novels are the first sort of almost perfectly conceived and constructed, unified literary novels. It almost seems like it's tearing out a piece of them to take a quotation. How much context do you need? What do these quotes mean on their own?
So I should acknowledge, and most of us who read Northanger Abbey deeply, which I still do, and it's not my favorite necessarily right at the moment. Pride and Prejudice is still my favorite, but it repays rereading. And that chapter 5, where she defends the novel, she makes fun of Elegant Extracts, which is a book, Miss S. Mrs. Knox's collection of sort of beauties from the literature of the period. And it was not lost on me when I was putting together a quotation book that I was doing something that Austen herself had made fun of in her own day. So, must be acknowledged, right? But I think that it's also the case that many people in her era kept commonplace books. Mm-hmm. She was not against quotation. These are not, I don't think the quotation book is itself a problem. I do think if we're only using the words without reminding ourselves of what goes around them or who said them, we're not reading as well as she'd want us to.
And it has to be said, her family did own Elegant Extracts, and she probably was very familiar with them and the content from them, as most authors were. Yeah. And they do provide a little bit more context than something like Bartlett's familiar quotations, which is the kind of thing I think you were trying to avoid in your book, which is just, here's a great saying, and we take it as it is. Although I even love Bartlett's familiar quotations, to tell you the truth. Yeah. So what do we gain by having our daily dose of Jane Austen?
So I know that there are people who reread the entire novels regularly. I mean, there's that philosopher Gilbert Ryle, when he was asked in the early 20th century, this is a famous quote of his, he was asked, "Sir, do you read novels?" And he apparently responded, "Yes, all 6 every year," meaning all of Austen's 6 major novels, obviously. So if you can read all 6 every year, that's a wonderful practice. But I think for many of us, that is a time commitment with everything else going on in our lives that we don't necessarily carve out the opportunity for or have the opportunity for. So I think what's beautiful about taking Austen in smaller chunks like that is being able to enter into a story you either don't know yet or you might know very well, and relive parts of it or reimagine parts of it through that more limited moment and limited set of words.
So would you say that the audience for your book is mostly people who are familiar with Austen's novels? Or could you enjoy it without being familiar with Austen's novels?
I would hope that you could do both. I think anytime we want to read a little bit of something that we enjoy and we've read it before, we're seeing it in a new way, right? We're seeing it differently on the day that we look at it. I had a lot of fun choosing particular quotes for particular days. That was, little Easter eggs in the book, like the one that I chose for Halloween. I got a very nice email from George, and I happen to know some of the Austen family descendants to the Jane Austen Society of North America. They've become friends over the years. And one of them wrote to me on Halloween and said, I've been reading your book every day, and today's is perfect. Do you have it there, George?
I do have it right
from
here.
October 31st. It's a favorite.
It's a Northanger Abbey. May I read it, Devoney?
Please.
"Ah, mother, how do you do?" said he, giving her a hearty shake of the hand. "Where did you get that quiz of a hat? It makes you look like an old witch." And that is as you provide the context, the wretched Mr. John Thorpe to Mrs. Thorpe.
Yeah, I didn't put wretched, but I think that's like a great quote to remember on Halloween, and it was really touching to get a message saying that she'd relived that part of her family ancestors' novel through that quote.
Do you have any favorites?
Do I have any favorite quotes?
Yeah.
So I did choose. I chose one that is my favorite for today, and it's May 1st. I'm going to read May 1st. This is a dig at you, George.
Oh, well, I'm sure half of the book is probably a dig at me if I read it carefully.
Yeah, so this is from Emma. This is my favorite of the day. "A married woman has many things to call her attention. I believe I was half an hour this morning shut up with my housekeeper." That's Mrs. Elton to Emma Woodhouse. So
why is that a dig at me?
Why is that a dig at you?
Yeah.
Well, it's making fun of married women and the idea that married women have it so hard. Do you think I have it hard?
I think I do all the housekeeping.
Yes,
so in fact, I do the cooking. So maybe I'm the one. I'm the Mrs. E in this relationship.
No, well, Mrs. Elton's point is that she has it so hard because she was with her housekeeper half an hour telling her what work to do.
Yeah, so, I'm your housekeeper. So do you have that?
You are
Mrs.
not
E.
my housekeeper.
Anyway,
that's an overstatement, but he does do the cooking.
Yeah, I've got a favorite, and let's
do George's favorite.
Let me. Oh shoot! It's
someone
March
in the chat,
5th.
Maria in the chat is saying she does a chapter a night, and that's a really lovely practice. That's a really.
There's some other
practice.
great questions in the chat, and I want to get to them because in fact this will be more fun. But
yeah,
I'm glad that you kept this for me. Oops, that's not it. It wasn't March. It was May 5th. Ooh. I'm
George.
sorry.
I'll talk while you're trying to find it.
Yes, keep talking. March. Yeah.
You know, another of my favorite things to do, and to bring up Deborah Yaffe again, her blog does a beautiful job of this, is to find quotes that are used in ways that it's clearly not taking the right spin. She looks for things that are either attributed to Jane Austen, but they're from the adaptations, but called Austen, or things that are misquoted or taken like severely out of context. Deborah's got some great blog posts on that. But I also love keeping an eye out for how these quotes that we who've read the novels might imagine in some way, but clearly mean things to other people that that were not part of their original intent, but are interesting. Like the number of pillows I've seen with "There's no place like home for real comfort." I have to kind of giggle every time I see one of those because it's a lovely sentiment. But of course, as you know, if you've read Emma closely, it's Mrs. Elton saying it. So in the book, I included the long quote, tried to include a longer bit. She starts out by saying there's no place like home. By the middle of the quote from her, she's saying, well, but you should go out. And then at the end, she's saying, you know, really, you should do both. So she's just talking her way in and out and around of a lot of garbage, as many of her quotes are. So the idea that this little bit from her gets repeated as by Jane Austen on pillows is actually it's both crushing and touching at the same time. And I see that one a lot in our pandemic lives, right? There's no place at home like home for real comfort. I'm not sure how many of you are feeling that pandemic-wise right now. May you be. But it is amusing that Mrs. Elton, maybe not your best source on that.
I've written in defense of Mrs. Norris. I think writing in defense of Mrs. Elton might be my next task for myself. My favorite, which is also a marriage-related quotation on March 5th from Pride and Prejudice, and you know this is one of my favorites, but think no more of the letter. The feelings of the person who wrote and the person who received it are now so widely different from what they were then that every unpleasant circumstance attending it ought to be forgotten. You must learn some of my philosophy. Think only of the past as its remembrance gives you pleasure. That is a beautiful one for marriage. I wish you think it's a beautiful one, Devoney. I wish you would live up to it a little bit more. And so much. Anyway, we'll leave that one alone. Go ahead.
I just want to do one more anecdote.
Yeah.
George and I have in the past team taught courses, and I know some of you are teachers. There's some librarians on the call. You sometimes do things in collaboration. And when we taught an Austen course, the last time we taught it was a large lecture. So when is this going to ever happen again? About 100 people in a room together. And at the end of the semester, we got the evaluations back, and they were mostly quite positive, and we were really thrilled. But a couple of students said, "Oh my gosh, I was so upset whenever the professors fought in front of us."
Well,
and I just love that we thought we were having arguments about literature, and they thought they were watching something frightening.
I hate to think about what their home life might have been and what they have witnessed their parents doing.
Well, I don't know.
It reminds me of the time first time we gave a talk together, and Devoney and I have given a number of he said, she said talks at the conference of the Jane Austen Society of North America. And after the first one we gave, where we pretended to have this argument about Northanger Abbey, and we hammed it up a little bit too much, because this woman, a longtime Jane Austen Society member, came up to me and tried to comfort me and suggested that Devoney was quite a nasty person for having disagreed with me so vehemently during our talk together.
Oh, dear.
It's all staged, at least Well, maybe not, but it seems
so let's do some questions from the chat.
I want to
Thank you for humoring us with these stories.
Yes, thank you for humoring us, which is the saddest thing is we're able to enjoy telling them over and over again, or at least I am.
Well, what we used to tell our students who were in on the joke, I guess, is a married couple fights with you about literature and fights about literature, and you learn something in the process. So
that's the aim.
That's what
if you're not turned off and get scared. So I've got a Devoney, I've got a good, a really interesting question from Mike Ormsby. Do you attribute free indirect discourse sentences to the narrator?
Sometimes I saw that one. It's hard to do our patter here and the chat, as any of you know who've done this, but I did see that one scrolling by. It's a fascinating question. So I did make the decision to say that was the narrator, or in some of the quotes it was unmarked. But I also, a couple of times, I really struggled with this with my editor, believe it or not. And so we would say Emma's thoughts, or the narrator and Emma's thoughts. That is such a great question, right? And this is the brilliance of her prose, that there are places, and Emma especially, right, where you can't tell what's the narrator, what is inside the character's head, what is more omniscient. That's a great question, and I don't know what you would do, Mike, if you think that's a cop out or or what kind of answer you would give there. But that's what I tried to do. Emma's thoughts is one I went with, I know, once.
And it's a complicated question because the irony that comes up in Emma through free and direct discourse makes all of those quotations, any quotation you took from that book is multi-layered. It's both true and not true at the same time. It's both the narrator's thoughts and maybe Emma's thoughts. So even distinguishing all the time between Emma's thoughts and the narrator's isn't always possible. Here's a more straightforward question. Who is your favorite Pride and Prejudice character and Mansfield Park character?
Ooh.
And let me also put it in the context of your book. Who have you quoted the most?
Oh, I'm not sure there. I have not counted that. For the index, I needed to go back and say what was where. So but I don't know which character. I'm guessing it's Elizabeth. I'm guessing it is. I mean, she's got such great lines. It's certainly not Lady Catherine, although I did give her a few moments to shine, of course. But I'm guessing it's Elizabeth. And that, if it's not, that should be the case, I think.
And is Elizabeth your favorite P&P character?
Yes.
And who's your favorite Mansfield Park character? A little more complicated.
Oh, that's hard. That's hard because I know it's wrong answers only here, but I do really like Mary Crawford.
Yeah, I prefer Fanny Price.
I know, I know.
But I married Mary Crawford,
no,
so there you go.
I was actually very shy when you first met me. Is that not true? No one believes it, but I was quite shy.
I think you're still shy.
And I definitely identify more with introvert, and that is, I think, the thing about Fanny that makes her a compelling character. And I don't hate her as I did in my 20s. I did hate her in my 20s. Now I find her much more compelling and deep and interesting. But I still do like Mary Crawford. I'm glad to see some other people are not going to run me out of town on a rail for that one. But
speaking of Mansfield Park, I see a question from Jean Talbot. Do you defend Aunt Norris and Mrs. Elton as people or as amazing character depictions?
Yeah.
So of course you can defend them as amazing character depictions, and Mrs. Elton is infinitely amusing and enjoyable, and Mrs. Norris is horrifying and evil. And yet when I defended Mrs. Norris, I was actually trying to write a sympathetic account of her perspective and her motivations, and I think I could do it for Mrs. Elton too.
That's a beautiful and crazy thing. That's how about that as an answer. That is a beautiful and crazy thing. What we haven't talked about are the letters. And I think one of the things that I don't know how many of you go back and reread the letters. I think they're harder to reread. And I know you've taught them recently. But I think there are lots of really amazing one-liners that are designed as one-liners and designed as zingers in the letters. And I can't remember what day I put this one on. Okay, I'm going to try to quote it from memory. I'm going to not quote it from memory because this is a group where I don't trust myself. You're gonna be all over me. here it is. Okay. This is Jane writing to Cassandra. She says, I will not say that your mulberry trees are dead, but I am afraid they are not alive. And that is just tucked in there in the letter, and it is obviously meant as a one-liner quip. It's a comedy routine, and it's beautifully done.
And let's pull that back to both your quotation book and not just the letters, but what is those comic one-liners are also all throughout the novels.
Yeah.
What would you say the relationship is of those comic one-liners to the narrative flow of the entire book? How important are they? What is their purpose within the larger narrative?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think they challenge you to read carefully. And I think when we teach these, this is one of the ways that we try to talk about it with 21st century students is it's like a beeping of a truck backing up. A lot of these lines are like a truck backing up, only you don't necessarily hear the beep unless that's what you're watching for. Like that line about the mulberry trees, the first part is setting up the second part, and you don't necessarily know it's coming. But once you do know it's coming, you just see her using language to back into the joke. And I think so much of her prose is like that. You have to reread it to get it. And I love things that are rereadable, but that repay the rereading. Does that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, does that answer your question? It was a bigger question than that. I was answering it with a small analogy I got too interested in.
Well, I'm just trying to think, when you've got a quotable writer where you can extract many sentences, even many more than the three, as you know, you had a hard time narrowing it down.
Just 378.
Is the quip, the funny sentence, the point, or do they serve the larger purposes of the piece of writing, whether it's a novel or a letter?
Well, we're literary critics, so we think everything serves the larger purpose. So our students and our sons, for that matter, our sons are teenagers, accuse us regularly of reading too much into things. But I think, yes, those one-liners are there to tie together, telegraph, give deeper meaning to characters, themes, scenes, moments. I mean, I think there are other authors I love who don't waste words, but Austen is incredible for there's no waste. It's not like you'd say, well, just take out that chapter. You and I do fight about Miss Bates and her long dialogues. That sometimes I have to admit, when I'm reading Emma, I skip over those parts. But George thinks this is like heresy.
Well, I think that they are so perfectly written, and every word is a clue. So, but they're the antidote to comedy, because in fact, the comedy of them is elusive to almost every first-time reader, just as it is to Emma herself. And it's only through that kind of reliving of the novel that one can both fit the pattern and enjoy it, because one's taking one's time a bit more.
Yeah.
So you have no excuse for not rereading them carefully.
And fun fact, I know George knows this fun fact, the book I did before the Daily Jane Austen quote book was The Making of Jane Austen. And I got to talk in there about early performances. One thing that I discovered too late to include, but did a little piece about, was that, in fact, the first spoken word Austen that I've been able to track goes back to the 1850s and 60s, and it is a series of performed dialogue from Miss Bates. So some people, readers in the early Victorian era, the first access they might have had to Austen's words would be through listening to these performances of Miss Bates, and almost to an example, to a person, they were performed by men. So it was female impersonators on stage reading lines from one of Miss Bates' monologues. And it was called The Voluble Lady. I wrote a little bit about this in a piece in The Atlantic, but I do think there's much more here. So clearly, Victorian readers understood the comedy, and maybe in ugly ways. Maybe we don't want to think too deeply about how they found the comedy in Miss Bates.
You're definitely laughing at Miss Bates if you're performing it like that, especially of a man performing it.
Yes.
And the question is whether that runs counter to the purpose of the novel or not, or that's a question I would have.
Yeah. And there's a long history of female impersonators too, to contextualize this in. But yet it was clearly to make fun of the garrulous spinster. It was at her expense when this was performed, and audiences apparently ate it up and laughed like crazy. But there were years when people would have thought that The Voluble Lady was a work of fiction by Jane Austen.
Would you consider that a with the grain or against the grain understanding of the novel?
I don't know. I think it's both.
And another question, while we're on that topic, is Miss Bates quoted in your book?
I'm supposed to know that? I don't know that offhand. I'm sure there's a quote from Miss Bates in here, but I don't know that offhand. Honestly, I don't.
It's
to be continued. I'll tweet that out. I'll tweet out the answer to that if I find it.
What are there any other favorite quotes you have that you'd like to discuss?
Somebody in the chat says you couldn't fit a quote on one page.
Well, that's true. It would, yes, the press would have had to pay for more paper and would have cut into your royalties there, definitely.
Dear, that's funny. Thank you. That's good.
Here's another question. Let's see if we can answer it. I'm just going to read the question off the screen. When the narrator of Persuasion says that Richard Musgrove never did anything in life to deserve more than the abbreviation of his name, is this the first novelistic instance of someone getting called a
D-I-C-K? Yeah, getting called a dick. I don't. I'm pretty sure not. But do you know an example?
I don't know from a novel, and yet I think our colleague Simon Dickey has written a book about the kinds of comic narratives in which a name like Dick Musgrove would have been a pretty constant element of really schoolboy kind of humor. So it is an interjection of schoolboy humor into it. And that happens throughout the 18th century. One of my favorites is in Gulliver's Travels, when Gulliver, in his pompous, self-important way at the beginning of the narrator, talks about his good master Bates, who is one of his.
Oh dear.
So
we're going to go.
This kind of thing is very popular in the 18th century. It's what the question points out is within a serious novel, do we see that? And there's, the rears admirals, rears vices. Yeah. What's your take on that situation?
So for those of you who don't know this particular controversy, this is about a line from Mary Crawford in Mansfield Park where she, and I don't have this quote in front of me, George. See, this is what happens when we're just winging it. But she says, do not mistake me for, I entreat you, do not mistake me for making a pun here, after having used the words rears and vices, to refer to admirals, but also to refer to bad behavior by men. So the question is, are the rears and vices about sodomy, or are the rears and vices about body parts, all kinds of vices? We know that her uncle was an adulterer, right? I mean, this is the reason she's had to go to Mansfield Park in the first place, is because he brought a mistress into his home, and she, as an unmarried woman, could not stay there any longer and be in the polite world still okay. So we know from the novel very clearly that there's been vice in front of her face that she's had to remove herself from. So I guess my feeling is you're asking, the question is it a sodomy joke, or is it an adultery joke, or what kind of joke is it? And would Mary Crawford make a sodomy joke? I'm not sure.
I think so.
You think so?
I do. So we're not going to get into this too much in front of you, but we might have a little disagreement about that. Yes,
we might. I'm not 100% on that. I'm not 0%. I'm not saying absolutely impossible.
Did you put that one in the book?
Oh, George.
Well, you got to remember the quotes you put in the book.
378 of them. Yes, that's in here. That's got to be in here. If I didn't, I was not thinking straight. That's got to be in here. I can't look it up now. I'll have to tweet that one out too.
Are there any other questions? Please put questions in the chat, and I will try to. Jean, I agree with you. Devoney has suggested it might just be adultery or some other slightly...
Jean said, what else could Mary Crawford have been referring to, Devoney? Well, okay, overly literally, rears and vices are two kinds of admirals, rear admirals and vice admirals. So she could be making a pun on the fact that they are large men and that they are engaging in gambling, adultery, whoring, all sorts of things fell under vices. So the question is whether is she connecting those two? Jean says no, she doesn't think so. I respect that. I'm not saying it's 0% likelihood. You asked me what else could Mary Crawford have been referring to. I was giving you the devil's advocate other way to read that still says it's a pun, that still says it's. I mean, Edmund is embarrassed for her. Everyone's quiet afterwards. Clearly, she said something that crossed a line. The question is, how far did she cross? And I'm not 100% that was a sodomy joke by Mary Crawford on that page as intended by the author.
I'm 100% sure 100%. Myself.
Okay.
Now, we've already talked a little bit, and I'll keep monitoring the chat. But why don't you talk about, we've talked about this quotation before, but what about the 10-pound note?
Yes. So...
should I try to share the screen? Is that going to be too dangerous?
I think she said she didn't have it set up for us to do that.
No, I thought she said she did. We can.
Okay, try. You want to?
Yeah, I'm sharing it.
Okay.
Can people see this on the screen?
No, I don't think so. Can they?
Give it. Yes, they can.
Oh, okay.
I see. So, okay.
Yes, right. We can.
Yeah, so you see where they've put down and right under Austen's face, I declare after all there is no enjoyment like reading. Now, my theory is that somebody at the Bank of England said, we need a nice quote about Jane Austen reading. So Google that and came up with something from Brainy Quotes. And that's what they've had to defend that, well, they were really in on the irony and in on the joke. And
is that what they're claiming?
Yeah, I do believe that's what's been claimed.
So let me ask you, Devoney, what's faker, the way the quotation is used or the portrait of Jane Austen?
In my professional opinion,
yes,
I think the portrait is way faker, but way more fake.
Maybe people would be interested in your take on the portrait.
Yeah, so maybe I don't know how many people follow the portrait wars, but this one is based on the 1869 portrait by James Andrews that her family had done probably while he was looking at Cassandra's watercolor. There are definitely similarities. But this was done to put on that 1870 memoir of Jane Austen, and this is a kind of even more prettified version of the one that Andrews did then. So this was done 50 years after her death. If you put it side by side with the one we know, that was Cassandra's watercolor, now in the National Portrait Gallery, London. I know lots of you have done this, but if you put them side by side, this is the younger version, this is the happier version, this is kind of the pretty girl genius version, and I think that's a bigger travesty than the quote.
Wow.
You think differently, huh?
No, I think they're both ridiculous travesties. And,
well, you made me choose before. You have to choose. You think the quote's the bigger travesty?
I think the quote's the bigger travesty because it is a
well, go back to the chat. Lie. I want to see what our
okay. I'm going to stop the share. Yeah. You've seen the 10-pound note. And Maggie says, I'm convinced that the image was chosen because it's in the public domain.
Yeah, of course.
That is obviously very true.
Maggie, you're, thumbs up. You're absolutely
so
right.
Mike Ormsby with another great question. What would be a better quotation for the 10-pound note?
I love that. You know what I would love to see on it? And this is me not being realistic. But the line that Austen has from her letters where she talks about liking pewter, and she's talking about coins. Can you do that one by memory?
No, I cannot.
Shoot. Again, it'd be nice if I could just call these up. But it's a conversation she's having, and she says, my brother Edward calls it pewter, and I don't have any problem with pewter. So she's saying, I'm happy to make money from my writing, in effect. And I think that would be a great quote. I don't know how you feel about that one, Mike. If you have another suggestion. Yeah, I like fame. Thank you, Maggie. I like fame, but I like pewter too, is a good paraphrase of that quote. Oh, another great suggestion from Mike. He says we must retrench.
Yeah, that is beautiful from Persuasion, of course.
Mike, that is amazing, beautiful line. We're having fun here too. Thank you. You're making us laugh, so that's a gift to us.
Any other? Please keep the questions coming. We still have a few more minutes. Devoney, are there any quotations in which you are making fun of people in your life? So what kind of private jokes did you include in your book of quotes?
So George knows the answer to this. On his birthday, I put Henry Tilney's conversation about making fun of women but respecting women. So the long conversation he has with Catherine and his sister, where his sister defends him and says, you know, he's actually quite respectful of women, but he's being a snarky. He's intoning some sexist, snarky ideas as he is being defended. So that's what I put on your birthday.
So are you suggesting that I'm like Henry Tilney?
A little bit, yes.
And does that mean you're like Catherine Morland?
I hope I am no longer so naive, but clearly I was at one point.
Or we wouldn't be sitting here together right now. Well, Tilney is flirting, as Maria says to everyone.
Of course he is.
But the question about Henry Tilney is is he a jerk or is he okay? What's your opinion?
Yeah, see, we've gone back and forth on this one too. The line about Henry Tilney that I'm not sure what to make of. He seems like such a very strong-willed person in many ways, but the idea that he falls in love with Catherine, we're to believe at the end, out of a kind of sense of gratitude is really interesting. I just think that's a very telling moment about his heart. You know, that he is more soft-hearted a person than perhaps other parts of his characterization show him to be throughout the novel. And then that line makes us re-see him, I think, a little bit more. That he likes being loved, and you could say that's about his ego, but he also sees Catherine anew through her interest in him, her seeing the better in him, I guess maybe is the way of putting it.
And I used to think of her not as a substantial character, as just kind of a Gulliver-like mask for the satire that comes through in the novel. But when I taught the novel last spring and spoke about it with students a lot, I think there's more there than I had given credit to the character.
See, I've come around to Mansfield Park. He's come around to Northanger Abbey. I like this. Alice suggests for the 10-pound note, a large income being a recipe for happiness, as a good quote, which is amazing and wonderful. That was actually, I used that at the end of the foreword to the Daily Jane Austen, because I said reading Jane Austen's quotes every day is the second best recipe for happiness, you know, because obviously the first is a large income.
What do you think is the right way to read a book of quotations like this? You've got a year of quotations, one large quotation for every month, followed by a daily quotation.
Yeah.
Is this a one-sitting book, or is this I'm going to pick it up and savor the quotation of the day book?
I guess I had more imagined it as a daily practice, and the way that there are traditions of Christian devotionals, right? That, you know, I guess I'd more imagined it in that way as a daily practice. But I think you could do it in a binge read and have a lot of laughs. I think you do it as a party game. I think, you know, there are lots of ways that I think quote books can be used in this kind of particular.
Kind of like Cards Against Humanity. Maybe
right.
We put some gaps in there. And
hey, games and gaming up next. So this is you're right up there, George. You're right on point. You're right on point.
Any other things you'd like to say, Devoney, about putting the book together, about how it came out? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think it's beautiful, and I'm so glad that this is in the world, and it feels like a real honor to have been able to put it together. The University of Chicago Press has done several others of these too. If you don't know about that, they've done Henry James, Charles Dickens. They just came out with the Thomas Paine. I think this is going to be part of a series. So if you're somebody who likes well-chosen, and I hope mine are, and I know the other books are well-chosen quotations from authors we either want to learn more about or already know and love, then I hope that you'll think about checking this out. Great stocking stuffer, or someone told, or weren't you supposed to say that? So I didn't have to.
This is a great stocking stuffer, available on Amazon and at many fine bookstores.
Or from the press itself.
What I'm impressed by is that any of you who've read Devoney scholarship knows, you know how deep it is, how original it is, how sophisticated it is, how you're able to pull back into something that is very reader-oriented, very deep in its scholarship, but wears it very lightly. And I think, I think you'll enjoy this book very much. So and check out Jane Austen books. I would agree with that as a great place online. Jane Austen Books, which is a bookstore based in Cleveland, where not only books like Devoney's works can be found, but all sorts of books about the period and about Jane Austen, and really a remarkable resource for those of us who are reverting to literature in these absolutely crazy times.
Crazy.
So I want to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. I think Anna's coming on. Thank you. Oh, Anna, I think you might
Can't
be
hear
muted.
you.
I think you might be muted, Anna. This is such a gift. What a beautiful way to spend this historic day. We're just so thrilled to have spent this time with all of you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Great to see so many friends here. Bye-bye.